Thank you so much, Bill. I know you wanted to be here, and really, it's great that you actually are here in this day and age. It feels like you're here, and so much of the work that you've done since taking over the Pipeline Safety Trust, everybody has felt. I think you did just a really. I've been in the room with you and had the privilege of working with you for the last few years, and you captured so much in that. Your brief comments there that really underscores the invaluable work of the Pipeline Safety Trust, but really the people in this room and the work that we do together. But I know a lot of thank yous have been made over the last few days, but it's really important to thank you again, Bill and Rebecca and Carl, the Pipeline Safety Trust board members. I mean, the organization that put this on. I have the privilege of meeting with probably most of your organizations and you individually, but I've never had all of you in the same room, such a disparate group of stakeholders in the same room, and it's a real testament to the work of the Pipeline Safety Trust and the work of the people that are in this room and connecting virtually. Most of you know what PHMSA does, or at least you think you got a pretty good idea of what we do. But the volume of work that we do and the breadth of work we do has changed a lot in the last few months, or has begun to change in the last few months. It's certainly changed in the last 2 years. And there's a whole nother side of the agency that you probably have a little bit less insights into. We oversee the safe design, operation, maintenance of nearly 3.3 million miles of pipelines, oil, gas, other hazardous materials pipelines, including hydrogen, carbon dioxide, and other emerging fuels, along with our state partners. But we also oversee the transportation of nearly 1 in 10 goods that move in the United States. That's everything from nuclear waste to whipped cream cans to electric vehicle batteries. A lot of the products that move via pipeline also move via truck, via train, via vessel, and we regulate that side of transportation as well. And what I wanted to do was just share a little bit about where I come from and how I approach this role for those who I just haven't had the privilege of getting to know. Then talk about a little bit about what we've accomplished together at the agency, but really hardly anything we do alone. We do it with our state partners, we do it with the public interest stakeholders, and with the regulated community. And then talk about some of the challenges we face, and there are many, really so that you understand how we make decisions and you can better help us make the most informed and wise decisions, particularly if you have a better understanding of the challenges that we face. Bill just appreciated that brief introduction. You mentioned I worked for Senators Gary Peters and Amy Klobuchar, as well as Gina McCarthy at the Environmental Protection Agency. But in those roles, I worked on things like the 737 MAX failures, the Deepwater Horizon failure in the Gulf, the Flint water crisis. In each of those, there were fatalities, and those talking to victims, being on the ground and hearing firsthand the impacts when we get things wrong as a government regulator, informs at the most basic level everything, the approach that I take, but the approach that I think everybody should take. And that's why my first official visit was to Bellingham, Washington, to meet with Bruce and to meet with the Pipeline Safety Trust and learn about how this organization was created and really how PHMSA transformed into the agency that it was, into the agency that it is now. Since then, I've traveled to my once hometown, Kalamazoo, Michigan, site of a significant incident in 2010, and as Bill mentioned, to Satarsha, Mississippi. You know, there's a lot of lessons learned in each of those incidents, and I'm glad to talk about them. I'm going to try to be brief. I've lived in Washington long enough where people talk at you and not necessarily about what you want to hear. So I do want to get to any questions you have or things you want to talk about. But I did just want to get into a little bit of what we've done in the last couple of years. We've had what amounts to the most significant, the busiest, the highest impact enforcement few years on record. We've had our busiest in terms of significant rulemakings, busiest on record. I haven't, it's kind of tough to gauge on the litigation side, but the types of litigation and the new challenges that we've faced have been among the most significant. I'm trying to imagine a more significant era of litigation and challenges to the work we do. And we've managed to actually increase, finalize 3 rules that were 12 years in the making, updating definitions that were 50 years old, that ultimately allow us finally to regulate gas gathering lines, which were intended to be regulated in the 2000s when they really started to proliferate. But because of the challenges and obstacles and the process involved in proposing and finalizing rulemaking, and in our case, review by our advisory committees, and thanks for those in the room who've served on those or are serving. But the finalizing of those rulemakings was, as most people probably know, was no small task. We face a number of new challenges, and I want to just preview that the reason I'm sharing them is not to take away from a hopeful, what I hope is a hopeful conference and a constructive conference. But as I said, I want you to have a firm understanding of how we make decisions. And so we've got a number of upcoming rulemakings that many of you are aware of from the 2020 Pipes Act, our methane leak detection repair rule, our gas distribution rule. We've got a number of rules both on the pipeline side and on the hazardous materials side related to liquefied natural gas. We've got a class location rule. We have initiated rulemakings on carbon dioxide, and we're working on what we can do too on the hydrogen side of things. That's an ambitious list, especially when you compare to what we've done in the past and what the agency's done in the past. And it's what I wanted to start off with, just flagging the sort of immediate items before us, because we really need your help and support in finding and moving the ball forward as much as possible on all of those issues. And as I noted, we have to do that in navigating legal hurdles. When I got to the agency, I was thinking, all right, what are all the things we're going to do? I want to do all of the things. And when you have 3.3 million miles of pipelines, 1 in 10 goods that you regulate, and you do it, on a budget of roughly $300 million and fewer than 600 full-time employees, we've actually seen fewer. We've actually lost a few employees who've retired over the years during the pandemic. Lost employees. We're actually doing, as we get into this, all of this work with actually fewer employees, and many of you may be in the same boat. And Bill mentioned, how much the trust has done with a very few number of employees. But that's a little context going in. We had a cybersecurity incident, which some of you may have heard about in 2021. The largest pipeline system in our country voluntarily shut down, but it also limited access to 70 million Americans and prompted the national security apparatus to to do what it could to try to mitigate the impact to Americans. And our agency, of course, does not directly deal with cybersecurity, but of course we deal with the operations of the pipeline system, and particularly in getting a large system like that back up and running safely in a way that didn't continue the system being down for an extended period of time. IT, for somebody I wouldn't describe myself as an IT person. Before this role, I sort of had this notion that, the government IT agencies work on IT, and the IT people work on IT. But I certainly have a different perspective now, which is that every one of us is on the forefront of cybersecurity, from bottom to top of every single entity in the country. We are all on the forefront of cybersecurity. Even an agency that doesn't have direct jurisdiction. We had a little anecdote, but we had voluntarily offered to engage with our regulated community on cybersecurity issues prior to the Colonial incident, and a lot of the regulated community, about half, declined to engage with us in discussing their cybersecurity measures. After the Colonial Pipeline incident, we've not had a single regulated entity decline to discuss cybersecurity issues. But that is a new area where we don't necessarily have a lot of expertise. Congress has not tasked us with doing this work. We know that we have to take on that responsibility because of incidents like the Colonial Pipeline shutdown. On the technical front, I know it's been discussed in the last few days, but geohazard risk, excavation damages have and continue to be a major threat to pipelines. We're reviewing pipeline impact radii. There are myriad safety and environmental challenges, underground storage, LNG facilities. These are not, any one of these are pretty significant to try to tackle. We are trying to tackle them, but I'm so grateful that we are not doing it alone. These are big challenges that really require a unified and collaborative approach to solving. And I know it's a lot of the folks in this room that are helping do that. Workforce issues, I mentioned workforce issues. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but if you work at an entity that has not had workforce issues in the last few years, raise your hand, and I can see there are no hands raised. But as a federal agency, we've had to navigate working, largely virtually through the pandemic, and a far, far, far more competitive job market currently and over the last few years. But also, and I think not everybody in the federal government, let's just say, but really in the economy has realized there are different generations of people that value different things. And in talking to a lot of our new hires and the younger generation, there's value in being in person, but there's big value in making a difference in the work people do. And that's certainly true for other generations as well. But as we sort of forge our sort of workforce path forward, we have to, in order to attract and retain talent, we don't just have to have an attractive, benefits package. We don't just have to have an attractive place to work. We have to also make sure people are feeling that they have an impact in the work they do. And that's just what the data shows. Some of those things can be very difficult. They can be, I don't want to say mutually exclusive, but in competition. And you may have experienced that we are definitely experiencing that when you are limited in what benefits you can offer by statute, and you're limited in the flexibilities you can afford employees. You start getting down to a narrow avenue to attract and retain talent. Then you have questions of impact, and can you have an impact working as a regulator? And do you want to be? One thing we're trying to brand is we're a climate agency. We are helping solve the climate crisis. And in fact, anecdotally, but our new hires, whether it's some of our new engineers on the hazardous materials side or new lawyers, I said, how did you come to work for the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration? And in an anecdotal sample of a half dozen people, and individually without prompting, everybody said, I want to make a difference. I want to have an impact on the environment, and this seems like a place to do that. And I not capturing the full breadth of challenges in the workforce at our agency, but the challenges the workforce extend, in the public interest sector. I mean, obviously, we've got a talented group of people that help inform the work we do, but we need to attract people that want to engage on highly technical issues and help us do the important work we do and the big challenging work that we do. In the regulated community, there's not a single operator that I've talked to, and it's a question I always ask, but about workforce, how do you attract and retain good people? We had some great discussions yesterday with some of our friends in the labor community, about how to do that, right? How do you attract people that want to make a difference, a good living, and ensure that we protect against terrible safety outcomes and environmental damage. That is a problem that we have to consider as the regulator, and I hope everybody in here considers as a challenge. If we don't have people to do the work, enforce the regulations and update, make repairs, make upgrades to our infrastructure, then it is very difficult to have a country. The state programs, I mentioned our role being oversight of 3.3 million miles. A large bulk of that is our friends and partners at the state level, and they face all of these challenges and probably a bunch more. Mary's in here, and you may have heard some of the challenges that our state partners experience, but they are myriad. I'd give some remarks at the Energy Bar Association and to some of the leadership in the regulated community in the last few months, and I've touched on a lot of these items as well. The other thing I noted is that the regulated community faces some of these challenges as well, and I think it's things that we get raised in some of our rulemaking petitions, but also in trying to figure out how to craft rules that work, how to figure out how to craft rules that work before there's a failure, not dealing with problems after there's a failure. And I think it's good to have conferences like this to suss out what are the barriers from the regulated entity's perspective to achieving what we want to be achieved in terms of safety outcomes and environmental outcomes. So one of the ways to engage, the RP 1185 working group and public engagement, and I'm seeing so many faces that have been involved in months and months and months and months of discussions to establish a new standard for public engagement. And I know the Pipeline Safety Trust has been integral in those discussions, and just hats off to you. I think when you look at some of the the items that I discussed, some of these big picture challenges, they are not challenges that will be successfully overcome, optimally overcome by any one entity. And the engagement and collaboration between disparate entities is really essential. And one thing I'm confident of, and I mentioned at the top some of the people I've worked for. The people I didn't mention are President Biden and Secretary Buttigieg, but everyone, Gina McCarthy, Gary Peters, Amy Klobuchar, they're all people that are very good at finding common ground and focusing on that to make progress. And I know people in this room are focused on that. There was a great anecdote yesterday from one of our friends in the labor community that said, I had a 10-minute conversation with somebody that I didn't feel like I really agreed with a lot of what was discussed. But even if that's the only conversation I have, throughout this conference, it will have been worth, engaging, learning, and having these discussions. So I told you I wanted to kind of be brief so I could hear from what you want to talk about. I've got more I can talk at you about, but I'd really like to just hear from folks in the room what's on your mind and what questions you have. And Beth's got a microphone. And
we talked about this yesterday, and it's more of I guess it's a comment and a question. The rapid expansion with carbon sequestration pipelines is really a concern from the public. This is my second conference this week, and from what I'm hearing from landowners and communities is this is what they're really, really worried about. And looking at the we've been talking about the regulations and the standards for pipelines and the lack of siting control and process that we're really concerned about that. And what I've been hearing, what we've been talking about as public stakeholders is we really encourage the agency to look hard at this and fast and try and get something out there to provide standards and regulations for these unregulated CO2 pipelines that are going in the ground before we have, we talked about yesterday, what could be a mass casualty incident. Let's get let's get rules out there before we're forced to.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If you have anybody in the room has specifics, first of all, does anyone disagree with that? I think the good thing is I don't think anybody disagrees. We do need to strengthen rules on the books. We need to do it as soon as possible. And if you have suggestions specifically, we want to hear them. We have been working on them. We've engaged across the board. I think it was noted. I went down to Starsha. There were. We have rules on the books. We've also had these pipelines around for a long time, but not many. And the failures that occurred, they're preventable. There's 5 significant sort of things that failed, all of which were preventable. And so that's getting back to, we can write a good rule or standard, but how do we make sure it is adhered to? And the answer can't just be a fine after the fact, right? We need something that is foolproof. And so I think from there's certainly in that incident, geohazards, and we welcome. I'm sure you've been invited many times, but I'll do it again. That we're having a public forum on some of these big, difficult technical issues such as geohazards. I see, folks from the marathon team here, they've experienced and shared, made sure to share their lessons learned from the incident they had last year. That was a root cause of the big incident. I think prompted so much of the fear and with good reason. So I think we're addressing that, but there's also emergency planning and response. When you have an incident and you don't tell anyone, essentially for over an hour, that's completely unacceptable. But can we also get past having one individual, one entity be responsible for telling folks? Can we get to a system that is more foolproof in the form of getting information to people that need it, essentially instantly? And the answer is, I think we can. I mean, we do. And in fact, many sectors of the economy have figured out how to instantly alert people of information. So thank you for raising the question. We are focusing, among our many things that I talked about, that is at the top of the list.
Tristan, you had mentioned that PHMSA is a climate organization. And
climate agency.
Okay,
yeah.
Climate agency.
Yeah.
Historically, PHMSA's focus has been primarily on driving pipeline safety. And so I'm just wondering, as the focus shifts more to climate, do you have any concern on diluting the whole focus on safety as we focus more on climate?
Important question. So we're the pipeline and hazardous materials industry. We actually don't regulate pipelines that don't have hazardous materials in them, but a lot of them that do have climate warming hazardous materials in them. And on the hazardous materials side, on the other side of the agency, when you're moving these products by truck, train, plane, it's similar. On the safety front, it's very difficult to remove safety and environmental impact on the pipeline side. You have a release of a product, there's a climate impact, large or small, but you're having an impact. And so, when I say we're a climate agency, we've been a climate agency, just nobody's talked about it. In fact, for a few years, you weren't allowed to talk about it. But, a lot of the regulated community wasn't talking about climate change, but some of the things the regulated community has done has moved the ball forward in reducing climate impact. So, you can choose to talk about it or not talk about it. It's not shifting our resources necessarily, but they're inextricably linked. Focusing on carbon dioxide, if we can there's great potential, and the Congress recognized this in enacting incentives. If you can be successful in sequestering carbon, if you can, there's great potential to reduce climate warming effect. So our role is pretty narrow. We don't, to earlier comment, I mean, we don't deal on the siting side of things. We do have a narrow focus of safety. Congress emphasized in the last Pipes Act an additional focus on environmental mitigation. That's, keeping product in the pipe, particularly with respect to methane. But, you even talk to maybe some folks in this room would be good people to talk to about it. But, we've seen record exports of refined products, of LNG. And one thing, some of the bigger exporters have said is, relative to some other producers in the world, we can get more money for our product because we have associated reduced emissions relative to, say, another global producer. That's not saying a particular entity is the best or can improve, but there's a monetary value, for example, in addressing climate impact. So there's a long answer to a question of are we pulling resources away from safety to deal with climate change. We're not pulling resources away. They're inextricably linked, whether we talk about it or we don't talk about it. But we're going to talk about it because our employees will tell you they're proud of the work they do to help address the climate crisis. And so we'll keep talking about it, and I think that's helping us recruit some. We've recruited some top-notch people because of it, and it's interesting because I've asked, and I think some of the operators in this room, leadership, how are you recruiting PhDs? It's actually tough to find PhDs that don't believe the climate is warming and that humans are causing it. And they say, well, we talk about our transition and the role that people can play in doing that. So I think I would encourage everybody to be thinking about, your role in contributing to climate solutions. I think a lot about that from our labor community, the people who actually do the work that we all discuss in this room. And, they're solving one of the biggest challenges that humanity faces. They're actually doing the work on the ground. We set standards and rules, and we talk about how it should be done, but those are the folks that are actually doing it. So, and people should be proud about that. I'm proud of them.
Looks like we have time for one more question. And guess who?
All right, now I
has
feel
the
like I
microphone?
filibustered. If there's only one more question, I'm sticking around so you can ask your question, directly, and I, really want to be here engaging with folks. So go ahead.
So my last question is, you just mentioned the Pipes Act, and I know next year, 2023, Congress is going to start talking reauthorization again. You guys tend to get dinged with lots of mandates, but I was wondering if you have plans for asking Congress for things this year to address some of the shortfalls that we've been hearing about.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. And just put in a little perspective, we had, I think it's about 33 mandates in the 2020 Pipes Act. Last year, we got a little bump in resources for one of those new mandates, and that's on the hiring side for engineers and inspectors. But most of those others, there was not a commensurate change in resources to address. And so the answer is yes. We are extremely forthright about the notion, and it's just worth noting, the Inflation Reduction Act was enacted, just a few months ago. Creates a huge new incentive to build out infrastructure as soon as possible, because you only can take advantage of some of the incentives when you're producing, products, and so there's not a commensurate change in resources for oversight entities like us. And I don't think that was intentional. I've talked to folks on both sides of the aisle and throughout the administration, and I think there's an acknowledgement that we need to make sure there's requisite resources for adequate oversight of new emerging fuels, particularly ones that we're incentivizing as a government. So I do hope that's an important part of the reauth discussions. And I think there's a growing understanding that we do not have unlimited ability to instantly produce new rulemakings and meet the other mandates. It's actually painstaking work that we're able to do with our very lean team, and and really with the help of everybody in the room. Almost everything we do, we seek public comment before, during, after. And it ensures that when we don't get things right, we get them a little bit less wrong because of you. And so, good question. We've actually been creating a list. I said anybody who has an idea, we should put it on our list and share it with our members of Congress that are going to be working on the reauth. And no idea is too crazy, but let's capture the ideas as we come up with them, and we welcome any of you to share your ideas with us. Certainly encourage you to share with your elected representatives, and let's make sure our next reauthorization Let's just get tackle together the challenges we discussed today and the ones that you think merit more focus. So I'm going to stick around after for the next probably few hours, I hope. So glad to engage with any of you one-on-one. And if we miss you here, come visit us in Washington, come visit us in our regional offices, and just keep up the great work, everybody in the room and online. And thanks, everybody.